Okay, our next witness is James Lane. And you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true?
I do.
Thank you. State your name and go ahead.
Okay. It's a pretty emotional day. My name is James Lane. Some people in the room know me. I ran as the Green Party candidate for public advocate in New York City this past election cycle. And I thank everyone that supported me in one way or another for that. One of the reasons I ran was because I found my birth mother last year after 25 years of long, painful search processes to find out information about my lineage, about my health, about where I came from. It's really important. This bill, you know, those two surrogate judges that were here before, there was flames in my eyes when they were speaking. Because my story, my adoption story really starts for me when I was 23. I came home from work and found my mother dead. Then 4 months later, my father died of cancer in a hospital. And then a month after that or so, I had to take care of all the financial information. And lo and behold, there were adoption records in a safe deposit box. And I was asking the clerk at the surrogate court office, on the adoption papers it said, oh, these adoption papers for a male Gamble. And I said, what's a male Gamble? And the clerk at the court was like, well, did your parents have any other boys? No. That's you. So this is who told me I was adopted, a clerk at the surrogate court office. And so at this point, now I'm faced with another dilemma as far as closing out everything for my adoptive parents, since they're gone, is I have to prove to the court, the surrogate court, that I am the child of these people because now I'm adopted. So now I'm like this weird rogue person that's been living with them for 23 years. And the irony is, so I had to go and jump through all these hoops. The first thing I did was I called my sister. I have a sister who's 10 years older than me. And she was the reason my parents got married. There's a wedding picture, and she's in the belly and everything. Classic. And so I called her and asked her, was I adopted? And she's like, oh, no, of course not. And this is the whole story of the secrets and lies. She's like, well, I found adoption papers for a male Gamble. She said, oh, I always knew your name was Victor. So after 23 years, all these things come up. So, I hung up the phone. I was like, wow, this is really weird. I don't know what's going on. My life is crumbling, from, mother dead, father dead. Now I'm not even like part of these people. My grandmother called me up like a few minutes later because my sister was like, oh my God, he found out that he's adopted, you had to do damage control or whatever. So my grandmother went through the process of telling me the story about my adoptive parents and their sagas as far as they've tried, after my sister was born, they tried to have another child, went through, I think it was 9 miscarriages or something like that. And so they went through their own version of loss. Growing up with them, I think that they really didn't take care of what they needed to do before they adopted me. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was trying to play the role of mother and father, but got kind of abusive, punishment, not really, being a little bit too excessive for the crime, certain things. I just remember getting beat, like, rulers breaking off and all that. But, this isn't about that right now. But it was a lot of what made me what I am today. Somebody that sees a lot of evils, a lot of injustices. The fact that a person, especially for me, a person of color in this country, a victim of slavery, being once again told that I can't find where my people are, it's something that's just unbearable. It's like every time I think about this bill, this A909, I think about it and I say, you know what? if this bill doesn't pass, they should give adoptees reparations, because that is what is needed. I mean, because of the emotional problems that we have to suffer, not knowing what our medical records are, it's painful. I went through some really bad times, really, like during these 25 years of trying to find some information about my mother. And every time I went around, it was just a brick wall after brick wall. My adoptive parents died when they were 53 and 55. You know, they had really bad health conditions. My mother had diabetes, so she lost 3/4 of her leg. And then she had like kidney problems, and she had to do home dialysis. My dad had throat cancer. And I'm watching these people deteriorate for like 5 years, from when I was like 18 to 23. And, you know, and it was like, what is my future? You know? And this was before I found out I was adopted. So I started making changes in myself and become a vegetarian and do whatever. Then when I found out I was adopted, I was like, okay, well, I'm not adopted to them, but I still don't know anything about my history. I served in the military, you know, and I'm thinking every time I went to a doctor, up to that point, I lied. I said, oh, yeah, you know, my mother's got high blood pressure and diabetes. She wears a medical alert thing. And my dad, you know, he seems all right. But that's not my history. That was their history. So I didn't know if I was going to be alive past 50 or whatever. So I started searching, and during the searching, you know, and it's really interesting because sitting here and hearing the testimonies of people that are clinical social workers and such, and you're like, my God, I'm a textbook example of this pain, of this thing that happens. You know, this bill is about health. It's not just physical health, it's mental health. I found myself like walking on, you know, but too close to the edges of subway platforms and looking out of windows from tall buildings and just like inching a little bit forward and say, you know, what's my purpose here? I don't understand. Like, I'm here, but I don't know where I came from. What's the point? And I've never been like that my entire life. Everyone always remembers me, oh yeah, you're the goofy kid in high school, always smiling and laughing. But then these things, these thoughts, these feelings would just come up. So it went for about, say, 10 years or so, this kind of dark period I went through. And then finally I met my future wife, and things sort of normalized a bit. You know, you meet somebody, you get married, you start talking about doing a family. And then when we started trying to have a child, it took 6 years to have our son. And during those 6 years, all these things come back again. Like, is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with, you know, my past history or something like that? You know, we've gone to the geneticists at the Cornell and all these places, and you know, and they would look and say, well, what's your family history? And as everyone else said, I don't know, I can't tell you, I'm adopted. And this one geneticist looked at me and said, you know, you look like you have some Latin American in you. And I'm like, really? You think so? Okay, I'll go for that. I like spicy foods, that's good. But, sorry, there's a lot of pain and laughter in adoptees. But, so you kick yourself because you're wondering what future am I creating for this child if we do have one? You know, what can I give him as far as family history? You know, there's going to be a time when he goes to school and everyone's going to be going around the classroom making their little family tree projects and say, look, here's my daddy, here's my mommy, here's my cousins. And I'm going to be like, you got a stump. That's all I have for you. I don't know where everybody is, you know? So luckily, we did have our son. Everything worked out. But now he's in this world, and so those feelings come back. It's like I can't deal with this anymore. We have to find out something. So luckily, my wife is a social worker, and she knew the agency that I was adopted out of, and so I think only because of her helping to advocate for me as somebody in the field, she was able to help me get my non-identifying information, which is amazing because I started off telling I found my mother. Before I found her, I was trying to get some additional information for some search angels and whatever. And they looked at the non-identifying information I had, and they said, this is atrocious. We can't find anybody with this. You have to go back to the agency and get more information. And at least the search angels gave me additional information about what I should ask. And so I went back and asked, filled out their forms and everything. And still, to this day, I submitted this, I think it might be going on 2 years. I haven't gotten that information from my agency. And I didn't know how long they expect for me to wait. But regardless, I had to go the route of going through a paid searcher, one of the best in the industry. And, that said guaranteed 30 days, and I was sweating bullets because I don't have money to pay for a search, a paid searcher. So, as David Weprin said, I'm a person of not these financial means. So 30 days would go by and I go, phew, that's good. Another 30 days. I'm really depressed that they're not finding anything, but at the same time, I'm trying to save up money and everything. So it took about maybe almost 6 months. Then I get a phone call. Your case is almost solved. And then I was like, so what's the next steps? And they're like, well, you have to pay us. So at this point, I'm like, okay, so I'm calling up friends, lend me some money so I can pay for this and get this information. Because still at this point, I don't know if I'm going to find a living person or a grave. And so I sent them the money, then they sent me back this information, and they gave me like 12 pages of information about my family. My mother, 2 half-sisters, aunts, cousins, grandfathers, and it was like so much data that, I'm a data guy by profession. So I ran to not to promote it, I ran to Ancestry.com, started plugging all these things, and I'm like, oh my God. And my son's there with me, and he's like, what's that? I'm like, that's my family. He's like, yeah. And we're both getting excited, plugging in things. Look at his name. Elmira Stroud. Who's that? Like all these crazy names. And it's like an amazing feeling. But that was only possible because I had to spend a lot of money for a paid searcher. Money that nobody else, well, some people, but a lot of people can't spend. I actually do want to go back a bit, and I want to share with you an example of non-identifying information that I got. So it starts off, Victor Gamble, date of birth, April 21st, 1965. Says birthplace, Booth Memorial Hospital. Mom age 15, first child, on birth certificate is male. Mother is very interested in completing her education. She feels that since she cannot rear the child herself, it'll be better off with adoptive parents. The father is someone Mother met once at school. He followed her home and raped her. She has not seen him since. Efforts would have been made by the Board of Education to apprehend him, but Mother's meager description of him made it impossible. She becomes hysterical whenever the father is discussed. She was in junior high school. Mother has a good relationship with her relatives. They are sympathetic to the problem Mother is having, however, very upset by the pregnancy. Mom was raised by grandparents who died and then raised by an aunt. She knew her mother and father but never lived with them. She is in a position of having many people around her and interested, but there is no one whom she wholly belongs. She feels no one cares for her. Mom was in a maternity shelter before she gave birth. She asked intelligent questions, and it's weird because they put that in quotes. When the process was explained to her, she was diagnosed as mentally ill, so I guess that's why those are in quotes. Your mom and her aunt visited once in May, and she signed the surrender in August. You were described as a chunky youngster with 2 dimples, very alert, responsive. He seems to be alert and physically quite unusual. At 3 months, he was able to stand up with help. October 65, placed with a family who could possibly adopt. First foster mother became quite hysterical when they came to move you. Because of Victor's physical attractiveness, the foster parents were extremely proud of him, and he soon became well known in the community. The whole family was stunned when it became necessary to remove him from adoptive home placement. You were walking by May of 1966. You were also saying words like, "Hi, Mommy, Daddy," and waving goodbye. You frequently sang with the foster family and made motions of conversation when they were conversing. Placed with the Lanes, June 17, 1966. Adopted April 5th, 1967. So with that information, that non-identifying information, I have a window back into my childhood before I was with my adoptive family, something that I never knew about. And a lot of things in there are really kind of painful because when I was growing up, I always considered myself an ugly child. You know, why do I feel so strange in this family? I just don't feel I belong. What's wrong with me? So then when I found out I was adopted, I'm like, oh, now it makes sense. You know, now I remember in high school when we were doing that blood test thing, and my dad was an A and my mom was an AB, but I was B positive, or, you know, it was like some weird thing. And I'm like, oh, I probably wasn't paying attention. So these lies and fears that people had about letting me know about my adoption was actually kind of life-threatening because I didn't know what my history was, my medical history. I mean, and just going back to what we're saying before and what I used to say on my flyers, I'll give you guys a copy because I didn't include it with my thing. You know, I'm running for a citywide office. And so my first issue is adoptee rights reform now because it is a human right. And people said, well, that's kind of interesting. I mean, what does that have to do with city government? I said, well, let me tell you, there's about 1 million people around America that are not able to know anything about where they come from, who they are, you know, their medical history and stuff like that, you know, and people seem to be all up and enraged when they hear stories about sex trafficking, human trafficking. You know, adoption is another form of human trafficking in a weird way, you know, and I hate to bring it to that level, but it is. As I said before, slavery was human trafficking. And not being able to know where you came from and who you are, that is just really devastating information. But I'm in somewhat happier times now because I was able to reconnect with my mother. And actually, because of all the extensive research I was doing to try to find out about where I came from, you know, I went through 3 different DNA companies, you know, and, you know, sort of cross-sectioning the data, because like I said, I'm a data geek, and I look at this stuff, I'm like saying, okay, this is interesting. For some reason, I'm 60% West African, but then the other 30% or so is Romanian, Tuscan, and Spanish. I don't know what that's all about, but then when I look at the other tests, I'm like, they all have that weird kind of mix. So when I found my mother, she tells me, oh, yeah, you know, because my father was a Venezuelan merchant marine. I'm like, oh, well, let me tell you something. It's like, look at this mix we got going on. So it's been pretty interesting as I share with her my stories of the scientific data, and she gives me the stories of what's actually real. Because, as was mentioned here before, when the state says we can give you health-related information about you, it's just based on whatever somebody fills out at that time. If you have somebody that's, like they said in here, somebody that's quite hysterical when they talk about a pregnancy because it was based on a rape, she's really not going to know much about the father's history. And she's barely functioning enough to write her own information correctly. One of the most powerful things for me was to see that I saw, you know, like I said before, my adoptive sister said, oh, I always knew your name was Victor. Then I got this stuff and it said, oh, it says Victor. I'm like, okay, it's interesting, you know, but I didn't really hold it to anything because I don't know who gave me that name. I know that my mother gave me up for adoption, so I don't know when this thing happened. And when the second person I met was my half-sister, and she gave me a big hug. Oh my God, Victor, it's you. And we had this really great conversation and talk, and I'm like, you knew my name was Victor? It's like, I always knew your name was Victor. Mommy never stopped talking about you. She's been talking about you for like ever since I was born. And he was telling the whole family, you know, mostly my two half-sisters, said, you know, you have a brother out there. He's, you know, he's older brother. He's 48 now. You know, one day he's going to come and find us and all that kind of stuff. For 48 years, my mother was holding this thought of I would come back and show them. So with my meeting with my sister, I said, well, you know, sis, unfortunately, the state wouldn't let that happen. And I showed her my falsified birth certificate that I used to get into the Army with a very extenuous background check, because my training was going to be like a year down in Fort Gordon, Georgia, and they had to do all this special, you know, checking on me and seem like police records, all this kind of stuff. But, you know, even they couldn't find that out that I was adopted. So when I showed my sister how I was just being blocked by the state, and a lot of my frustrations and anger, like when I keep thinking about those surrogate judges speaking before, just erase whatever you hear about people saying, oh, when mothers give their children up for adoption, they don't really want to see them anymore. They don't want to be contacted. They don't want some strange person showing up. You know, when, you know, a child finds out they want to be adopted, that's up to the child, you know, because it depends on the story they're being told when they're growing up. You know, if they're happy or if they're not or whatever, if they're inquisitive or not. But at the end of the day, people do want to connect. People that, if a mother is holding her baby in her body for 9 months, there's a connection there. And when she gives that child up, that connection doesn't just disappear because somebody says, okay, quick, let's get the white out and change who this person is. That connection is still there, and to this day. And one of my reasons for running for public office was to bring that level of discussion out into the public. You know, the media wouldn't cover me, but I didn't care. I was out there with my flyers, hitting the streets, doing whatever. And I would meet, if I met 10 people, I met at least 3 that were either adopted or knew somebody that was adopted, and they took my information and gave it to them, and I was getting their email addresses and pointing to the places to go to, registries, support groups, whatever. A couple of them are still emailing me today. It's like, I haven't done looking. I was just thinking about you. I just want to let you know I'm still thinking about coming to your group. I'm like, okay, man, whenever you're ready, we're there for you. You know, and going back to the judge, oh, you know, the state could do a better job of letting people know about these registries. I mean, that's just nonsense. You know, people just, this law shouldn't even exist. That's the bottom line. This shouldn't exist. I should just be able to just go just like anybody else. We've said it over and over again. Anyone else could just go to the Department of Vital Records, fill out a form, give them whatever money, and get your thing, and you're done. But for whatever reason, I'm seen as a threat. And believe me, I'm not, the only threat I am is to myself a lot of times. Because even though I'm in happy times right now, just because of this and not being able or allowed to have this information is something that is really just unbearable for me a lot of times. And, you know, I keep trying to focus on the good times. I focus on my son. He embraces adoption because, you know, we watch X-Men together and we see characters that are adopted. It's like, oh, that guy's adopted from here. That's so cool, you know. And it's like, in the end, but the important thing is even they know who their real parents are, you know. So that's really all I have for you guys. I mean, I just really want this bill to pass. I just feel like if it doesn't pass, I don't know what I'm going to do this year. When I think of my mother telling me I prayed every day that I would see you before the day I died, I think about all these other mothers out there that probably have that same thought. I think about Joe Saul's mother that he just told us about today. That is just not right. Too many people are going to the graves. Thousands of people are going to the graves because of laws like this. And that has to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.